In 1769, on the island of Corsica, only 1 year after the island had been sold to the Kingdom of France by the Republic of Genoa, a son was born to a lawyer of noble birth named Carlo Bonaparte. He served as the representative of Corsica to the court of King Louis XVI. At a relatively young age, his son attended a famed military academy, excelling in mathematics and history. In 1785, when only 16 years of age, he was commissioned as a lieutenant in a French artillery regiment. During the period after the French Revolution broke out, the young man fought in a number of engagements as foreign armies threatened France. He distinguished himself in strategic prowess, and in his 20s rose to the rank of general. The name of this man is none other than the infamous Napoleon Bonaparte. Allied coalition propaganda has spread many lies about him both during the war and after his defeat, and very few are aware of the true reasons as to why he and many men of different nations and classes faithfully fought for his cause. In 20 years of coalition wars against him, Napoleon Bonaparte would wage every battle he fights in self-defense of France and for the peace of Europe. Bonaparte was guilty of nothing more than becoming a threat to Judeo-Masonic Britain's divide and rule doctrine, aptly named balance of powers. This presentation seeks to once and for all shed light on the true cause of one of the greatest figures of human history. The following are excerpts from Planet Rothschild, Volume 1, The Forbidden History of the New World Order, by M.S. King. 1789, The French Revolution. The French Revolution is a period of radical upheaval in France. Unlike America's Revolution, which put limits on government power, the atheistic radicals of France seek total power. Their rallying cries of liberty, equality, and fraternity are empty words that attract gullible mobs. The revolution leads to the rise of the mad killer Robespierre and the Jacobins. From 1793 to 1794, the Committee of Public Safety operates as the dictatorship of France. A reign of terror is unleashed. King Louis XVI, Queen Marie Antoinette, and 40,000 others are executed, mostly by public guillotine. The Jacobin mobs single out priests, nuns, and the wealthy for special brutality. Though historians portray the revolution as a spontaneous uprising of the oppressed, the funding of the movement and the disciplined organization of the radicals suggests otherwise. Was Rothschild money behind the revolt? Could this be the meaning of the French Revolution's theme color, red? Rothschild is German for Red Shield, by the way. Many more spontaneous red revolts will follow over the centuries to come. 1795. The Jacobins are overthrown. The Directory takes control of France. The Jacobins, forerunners of the Communists, are eventually displaced by more sensible Republican elements of the revolution. Robespierre himself is then executed. The Directory will govern France from 1795 to 1799, as the worried monarchies of Europe, led by Great Britain, as well as the displaced Jacobin Reds of the New World Order, continue to wage war against a divided France. 1797. Italian Campaign. Napoleon Bonaparte captures Rome and defies Directory's order to dethrone the Pope. French military hero Napoleon Bonaparte completes his successful Italian campaigns, defeating Austrian, Sardinian, and Neapolitan forces before capturing Rome. The French general's stature as a military genius and leader is now such that he can defy the atheistic Directory's orders to dethrone the Pope and get away with it. Napoleon is by now a legend in the making, soon to be a political force in his own right, a force beyond Illuminati, Rothschild, New World Order control. 1798. Napoleon's Egyptian expedition. The French campaign in Egypt and Syria, 1798 to 1801, is Napoleon Bonaparte's campaign to protect French trade, undermine Britain's access to India, and promote scientific enterprise in the region. Napoleon approaches the Egyptians not as a conqueror, but as a liberator who respects their religion and culture. This position earns him solid support in Egypt and the admiration of Muhammad Ali, who later succeeds in declaring Egypt's independence from the Ottoman Turks. An unusual aspect of the Egyptian military's expedition is the inclusion of a large group of scientists and scholars. This deployment of intellectual resources is an indication of Napoleon's devotion to higher learning. Much of what we know today about ancient Egypt is the result of this mission. The discoveries include the deciphering of the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics by the way of the Rosetta Stone. 1798. John Robinson writes Proof of a Conspiracy. John Robinson was a prominent physicist and professor of philosophy at Scotland's Edinburgh University. He worked with James Watt on the early steam car, and he later invented the siren. The Illuminati had attempted to recruit him, but he declined. In 1798, he writes Proofs of a Conspiracy Against the Religions and Governments of Europe, in which he exposes the secret societies behind the terrorist French Revolution. His warning to Europe is stark. Quote, An association has been formed for the express purposes of rooting out all the religious establishments and overturning all existing governments. The leaders would rule the world with uncontrollable power, while all the rest would be employed as tools of their unknown superiors. End quote. French priest Abbé Baruel independently developed similar views that the Illuminati had infiltrated, leading to the excess of the French Revolution. In 1798, the Reverend G.W. Snyder sent Robinson's book to George Washington for his thoughts on the subject. Washington replied, quote, It was not my intention to doubt that the doctrines of the Illuminati and the principles of Jacobinism had not spread in the United States. On the contrary, no one is more truly satisfied of this fact than I am. The idea that I meant to convey was that I did not believe that the lodges of Freemasons in the country had, as societies, endeavored to propagate the diabolical tenets of the first, or pernicious principles of the latter. If they are susceptible of separation, that individual of them may have done it, or that the founder or instrument employed to found the democratic societies in the United States may have had these objects, and actually had a separation of the people from the government in view, is too evident to be questioned. End quote. 1798 to 1815, the five sons of Rothschild spread their money-lending empire across Europe. After amassing an enormous fortune from his base in the Hessian city of Frankfurt, Germany, Meyer Amschel Rothschild sends his five sons abroad to expand the Rothschild family empire throughout Europe. Each of the brothers will emerge as dominant financial players and behind-the-scenes political players in their respective new countries. The five sons and the five sub-dynasties they will operate as follows. Anselm stays in Frankfurt to run the German operation. Nathan in Manchester and then London, England. James in Paris, France, Solomon in Vienna, Austria, and Karl in Naples, Italy. Of the five, Nathan in London, that is the city of London, will become the wealthiest and most powerful of the brothers. His power surpasses even that of the other existing Jewish family dynasties that own the Bank of England, such as the Montefioris, the Goldsmiths, and the Mocatas. The London Rothschilds are the beating heart of the centuries-old movement to tear down European civilization and erect the New World Order in its place. 1799. Napoleon stages a coup in Paris, overthrows the Directory. Napoleon, the war hero, returns to a deeply divided and chaotic Paris. With the help of allies in the French Senate, Napoleon stages a bloodless coup and is named First Consul. A plebiscite, that is popular vote, is held soon afterwards. Napoleon's ascension to First Consul is overwhelmingly approved by the French public. The New World Order gang created the revolution in order to overthrow the monarchy. Now, with the rise of Napoleon, the New World Order has lost control of France. October 1800. Jacobins plot to kill Napoleon with daggers. The communistic Jacobins, working for their secret New World Order Rothschild bosses in London, want their bloody dictatorship back. They openly call for the death of Napoleon. One leftist agitator named Meche publishes a pamphlet comparing Napoleon to Roman ruler Julius Caesar, who was killed by daggers wielded by Brutus and others. Meche openly calls for, quote, the birth of thousands of bruti to stab the tyrant Bonaparte, end quote. Indeed, one of the Jacobins' plot, which is foiled, is the Conspiration des Poignards, or Conspiracy of Daggers, in October of 1800. The Jacobins plan to stab Napoleon as Julius Caesar had been, as he arrives at the Paris Opera House. Informants are able to foil the assassination plot, but the Jacobins will again try to kill Napoleon. December 1800. Jacobin bomb nearly kills Napoleon and his wife. 2 months after the daggers plot is foiled, the Jacobins nearly succeed in blowing up Napoleon's carriage with a bomb. Plot of the Rue Saint-Nice, or the Infernal Machine. Napoleon and Josephine, who faints, both survive the massive blast, but 10 to 12 innocent bystanders are killed and dozens more injured or maimed. Napoleon uses public outrage over the bombing to annihilate the remnants of the violent and conspiratorial Red Jacobins. 1801. Napoleon makes peace with the Catholic Church. After years of persecution at the hands of the atheistic Jacobin radicals and also the Directory, Napoleon moves to protect and preserve the Roman Catholic Church that he had spared from extinction during the Italian campaign. Raised Catholic, Napoleon retains a special fondness for the moral principles and teachings of Christ. As any wise temporal ruler, Napoleon believes that matters of faith should be discussed peacefully with a free conscience. The Concordat of 1801 between Napoleon Bonaparte and Pope Pius VII reaffirms the Roman Catholic Church as the majority church of France and restores its civil status. While the Concordat restores ties to the papacy, the balance of church-state relations tilts in Napoleon's favor. March 1802. The Treaty of Amiens, peace with Britain. The Treaty of Amiens ends hostilities between the French Republic and the United Kingdom. It is signed in the city of Amiens on March 25, 1802, and celebrated as the definitive treaty of peace between Napoleon and Britain. In retrospect, it appears to have been a British ploy more than a sincere desire to make peace with France. May 1803. Britain breaks the peace. Napoleonic Wars follow. The Peace of Amiens lasts only 1 year and was the only period of extended peace during the Great French War between 1793 and 1815. Britain does not evacuate Malta as promised. Instead, the British protest against Bonaparte's annexation of Piedmont and his act of mediation, which establishes a new Swiss confederation, though neither of these territories are covered by the treaty. These phony pretexts for starting a new war against Napoleon culminate in the declaration of war by Britain, and the reassembly of another coalition against France. Having failed to kill Napoleon from within France itself, the New World Order Mafia and the royal families of Europe will continue to wage a series of on and off coalition wars on post-revolutionary France. At varying times, Great Britain, the chief instigator, Russia, Austria, Prussia, Spain, and other minor kingdoms unite in opposition to Napoleonic France. The ensuing wars that follow are known as the Napoleonic Wars, although Napoleon didn't start any of these wars with Britain and company. It is important to note that without Rothschild funding, these wars would not have been possible, at least not in the long term. The Old World Order, that is the in-debt monarchies, and the New World Order, that is the Rothschild Illuminati, both seek the demise of Napoleon Bonaparte.
They say that the banks rule the world, control governments and countries. It might be true, but it wasn't always like that. This is how it all began. Merchants opened the first banks. Money has always mattered, but then along came people who were ready to kill for the money. Suddenly, influence became everything. To entangle all cities with power, all countries, all governments, to eventually rule over kings, to hold the whole world in your hands. Start your own story in Evil Bank Manager.
(1803) The Louisiana Purchase. Rather than borrow from the bankers, Napoleon sells land to the US. Napoleon needs money to finance France's war efforts against the European powers, but he is unwilling to borrow from the big banks. Napoleon once wrote, quote, "When a government is dependent upon bankers for money, they, and not the leaders of the government, control the situation, since the hand that gives is above the hand that takes. Money has no motherland. Financiers are without patriotism and without decency. Their sole object is gain." End quote. Instead of crawling to Rothschild, Napoleon raises money by proposing to sell the massive territory of Louisiana to the United States. President Jefferson jumps at the offer. Napoleon's move also closes a possible front in the Western Hemisphere from which Britain could wage war against French territory. 1795 to 1804, the fall of Alexander Hamilton. Meanwhile, back in the fledgling United States of America, in 1795, London's banker tool, Alexander Hamilton, is forced to resign his treasury position in disgrace when it is discovered that he is sleeping with another man's wife. This affair was also known as the Maria Reynolds affair. On July 11, 1804, Hamilton is killed in a duel with Thomas Jefferson's vice president, Aaron Burr, a political rival whom the arrogant Hamilton had insulted and defamed. Though dueling was illegal in New Jersey, Burr returned to Washington and finished out the remaining 8 months of his term as Jefferson's first vice president. 1804, Napoleon establishes the Napoleonic Code. Napoleon's lasting reforms include higher education, a tax code, road systems, and sewer systems. His set of civil laws, the Code Civil, now known as the Napoleonic Code, is prepared by committees of legal experts. Napoleon participates actively in the sessions of the Council of State that revises the drafts. The code forbids privileges based on birth, allows freedom of religion, and specifies that government jobs must go to the most qualified. Other codes are commissioned by Napoleon to codify criminal and commerce law. A code of criminal instruction is also published, which enacts rules of due process. The code will be accepted throughout much of Europe and remain in force even after Napoleon's eventual defeat. It is a revolutionary idea that spurs the development of the middle class by extending the rights to own property. Napoleon also reorganizes what had been the Holy Roman Empire, made up of more than 1,000 entities, into a streamlined 40-state confederation of the Rhine. This confederation will provide the basis for the German Confederation and the unification of Germany in 1871, resulting in the Second Empire, or the Kaiserreich. 1804. Genocide in Haiti. Black Jacobins massacre all remaining French whites. In 1791, the French Revolution in Europe had also inspired a revolution in the French Caribbean colony of Haiti. The after effect of the 13-year conflict will ruin Haiti, which remains an unhappy land to this day. The revolution begins as a slave uprising, but eventually degenerates into a genocidal race war targeting French settlers in Haiti, including many who are opposed to slavery and friendly towards the blacks. Even after slavery had been abolished, radical elements of the Haitian Revolution continued to incite racial hatred towards the innocent whites, who were far outnumbered by the blacks and mulattoes. In 1802, a notorious killer named Jean-Jacques Dessalines takes over Haiti by betraying his more reasonable and actually pro-French black predecessor, Toussaint Louverture. Napoleon had previously sent troops to retake Haiti, but as many as 40,000 died of yellow fever. Now, preoccupied with European wars, there is little he can do to save the whites of Haiti. The smart ones get out, but many of the bleeding heart liberal types refuse to see the danger of being such a small minority under black Jacobin rule. In 1804, Dessalines orders the genocidal massacre of the remaining white population of Haiti. His secretary, Boisserong-Tonnerre, declares, quote, "For our Declaration of Independence, we should have the skin of a white man for parchment, his skull for an inkwell, his blood for ink, and a bayonet for a pen." End quote. Squads of black soldiers move from house to house, killing entire families. The weapons used are silent ones, such as knives and bayonets rather than gunfire. This is so that the killing can be done more quietly, thus giving no loud gunfire warnings to other intended victims. Killing takes place on the streets. Plundering and rape also occur. White children are beaten and stabbed to death, and white women are raped and pushed into forced marriages under threat of death. To flush out the whites who went into hiding, the monster Dessalines proclaims an amnesty for all whites. When the terrified whites resurface, they too are murdered. One of the most diabolical of the massacre participants is Jean Zombie, a mulatto known for his brutality. One account describes how Zombie stops a white man on the street, strips him naked, and takes him to the stairs of the presidential palace, where he kills him with a dagger as Dessalines watches. In the Haitian voodoo cult tradition, the figure of Jean Zombie is the prototype for the zombie. The massacre results in the deaths of between 4,000 to 5,000 people of all ages and genders, but because the victims were white and the perpetrators were black Jacobins, the historians who serve the New World Order have forgotten them. December 1804, Napoleon is crowned emperor by Pope Pius VII. Napoleon, by a very wide margin, is elected Emperor of the French in a November 1804 plebiscite. He is crowned by Pope Pius VII as Napoleon I at Notre Dame Cathedral. The story that Napoleon seized the crown out of the hands of the Pope during the ceremony to avoid subjugating himself to the Pope's authority is not accurate, as the coronation procedure had been agreed upon in advance. After a string of stunning victories, France establishes itself as the leading continental power of Europe and builds alliances of its own. Napoleon is now larger than life, a development which has the British and New World Order types seething. 1805, Napoleon's triumph at the Battle of Austerlitz. On the first anniversary of his coronation, Napoleon defeats Austria and Russia at Austerlitz. The end of the Third Coalition War against him. To commemorate the victory, Napoleon commissions the Arc de Triomphe. Austria has to concede territory. The subsequent peace of Pressburg leads to the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire and the creation of the Confederation of the Rhine, with Napoleon named as its protector. Napoleon later states, quote, "The Battle of Austerlitz is the finest of all I have fought." 1807. Russia's Tsar and Napoleon make peace. In 1805 and 1807, Russia suffers major losses in battles with Napoleon's armies. Napoleon's forces, though victorious, are weary from fighting and unable to pursue the Russian armies further. Finally, Tsar Alexander I makes peace with Napoleon with the Treaty of Tilsit, 1807. The Russian ruler accepts France's continental position and vows support of Napoleon. For his part, Napoleon believes Alexander has extended him a hand of friendship. 1800s. Napoleon wants to assimilate the Jews. Napoleon is very tolerant in his attitude towards the Jews. As a result, he has won the respect of many of them, but he has his motives. Historian Rabbi Beryl Vine reveals that Napoleon was primarily interested in seeing the Jews assimilated, rather than prosper as an alien community. Quote, Napoleon's outward tolerance and fairness towards Jews was actually based upon his grand plan to have them disappear entirely by means of total assimilation, intermarriage, and conversion. End quote. This attitude can be seen from a letter Napoleon wrote in November of 1806. Quote, It is necessary to reduce, if not destroy, the tendency of Jewish people to practice a very great number of activities that are harmful to civilization and to public order in society in all the countries of the world. It is necessary to stop the harm by preventing it. To prevent it, it is necessary to change the Jews. Once part of their youth will take its place in our armies, they will cease to have Jewish interests and sentiments. Their interests and sentiments will be French. End quote. In his reflections and speeches before the Council of the State on the 30th of April and the 7th of May 1806, Napoleon states, quote, They are the carrion birds of humanity. They are a state within a state. They are certainly not real citizens. The evils of Jews do not stem from specific individuals alone, but from the fundamental nature of these people. End quote. Again, privately in an 1808 letter to his brother Jerome, Napoleon makes his assimilation plans clear. Quote, I have undertaken to reform the Jews, but I have not endeavored to draw any more of them into my realm. Far from it. I have avoided doing anything which could show any esteem for the most despicable of mankind. End quote. Napoleon's outreach to the Jews, of course, was intended to eventually assimilate them as Frenchmen. To a hardcore Jew, this is a big no-no. 1808. Napoleon's decree cancels debts owed to Jewish moneylenders. In response to complaints about Jewish moneylenders, Napoleon had, in 1806, suspended all debts owed to them. In 1808, he goes a step further and issues a decree that the moneylenders refer to as the infamous decree. Napoleon wants the Jews to move away from their traditional moneylending practices and become farmers and craftsmen instead. His decree severely restricts the practice of moneylending and annuls all debts owed by married women, minors, and soldiers. Any loans that had an interest rate exceeding 10% is also annulled. Napoleon's religious tolerance is admired by many of the Jews, but his efforts to regulate usury upset the Jewish moneylenders and sealed his fate. That is why, to this day, they refer to Napoleon's decree as the infamous decree. The Rothschilds of Europe must destroy Napoleon before his anti-debt monetary philosophy can take hold in Europe. 1808 to 1814. The Peninsular Wars. France versus Spain, Britain, and Portugal. British international intrigue draws Spain into war against its former French ally. The years of fighting in Spain take a heavy burden on France's Grande Armée. While the French win battle after battle, their communications and supply lines are severely tested. French units are isolated, harassed, and slowly bled to death by guerrilla fighters. The Spanish armies are repeatedly beaten, but time and time again they regroup and hound the French. This strain on French resources leads Napoleon to call the conflict the Spanish Ulcers. 1811. The US Central Bank is killed as Britain threatens another war against the United States. Meanwhile, back in the fledgling USA, the 20-year charter of Alexander Hamilton's monster bank is set to expire. President James Madison had opposed the bank in 1791 and has no desire to renew the charter. The Federalists, also known as the Hamiltonians in Congress, favor its renewal and close relations with Britain. The Democratic Republicans, that is the Jeffersonians, want to kill the bank and view Britain with suspicion. The vote to renew the charter is close, but the anti-bank faction prevails. The New York-London Bank is allowed to die. At this time in history, the British are coincidentally escalating tensions with America. Britain is already at war with Napoleon and blockading France. Under the blockade, US ships are being harassed and sailors taken prisoner. The young American Republic appears to be headed for a second war with its ex-mother country, which by now belongs to Nathan Rothschild and friends. 1811. British and internal intrigue causes Russia to break off its alliance with Napoleon. Napoleon and Tsar Alexander I of Russia had been enjoying friendly personal relations. By 1811, however, tensions increase as Alexander comes under intense pressure from political forces within the Russian nobility to break off alliance with France. Fearing another two-front war, Napoleon threatens serious consequences if Russia forms an alliance with Britain. By 1812, advisors, or intriguers to Alexander, suggest an invasion of the French Empire and recapture of Poland, now an ally of France. On receipt of intelligence reports on Russia's war preparations, Napoleon prepares for a preemptive offensive campaign against Russia. The invasion begins on June the 23rd of 1812. May 11th, 1812. Britain's Prime Minister assassinated just before he is to make peace with the United States. British Prime Minister Spencer Perceval enters the lobby of the House of Commons. He is on his way to a meeting whose purpose is to discuss how to defuse the rising tensions with the United States, an important goal for Perceval. A man named John Bellingham then draws a pistol and shoots Perceval at close range. Perceval is killed. Bellingham is tried and hanged just 1 week later. In 1787, Bellingham had been a midshipman on a vessel that was taken over by mutineers and sunk. In 1803, he briefly worked in Russia, where he was imprisoned for sabotaging a Russian ship also lost at sea. These incidents suggested that Bellingham is a political radical, and not just a crazed lone gunman. The odd manner in which Bellingham is so quickly executed, the lack of investigation into a possible broader conspiracy, his links to a mutiny, his arrest in Russia, and the looming bank war with the US all suggests that the killer is a radical patsy, used by higher authorities to eliminate a disobedient prime minister. Perceval's murder will be the first in a long series of political murders and attempted murders, which will plague Europe and America for the next 200 years. In many of these cases, it will be an emotionally unstable lone radical who is used to carry out the dirty deed. June 1812. The Strange War of 1812 begins, 1812 to 14. The murder of Prime Minister Perceval delays the efforts to improve relations with the United States. Had Perceval lived, the British wartime policy of European trade restrictions and harassing of American vessels would have been lifted and peace maintained. War commences just 5 weeks after the assassination. The same Hamiltonian Federalists who wanted to recharter the central bank also oppose Madison's decision to fight the British. After the war ends in 1814, the Federalists will be perceived as unpatriotic and their political party collapses. Perceval's successor, Robert Jenkinson, also known as Lord Liverpool, will later lift the trade restriction orders, which are the stated cause of the war. But by that time, the gesture is meaningless as the war is already started. Whether Liverpool was being sincere, or whether he was just trying to shift the blame for war onto the United States is unclear. What is known is that the House of Rothschild financed both sides of the war. 1812. Napoleon's invasion of Russia proves costly. Typhus wrecks his Grande Armée. The Russians avoid Napoleon's objective of a decisive engagement and instead retreat deeper into Russia. A brief attempt at resistance is made at Smolensk in August, but the Russians are defeated in a series of battles. Napoleon resumes his advance. Owing to the Russian army's scorched earth tactics, the French find it hard to forage food for themselves and their horses. The Russians eventually offer battle outside of Moscow. The Battle of Borodino results in about 44,000 Russians and 35,000 French dead, wounded, or captured. Although the French win, the Russian army has withstood the major battle Napoleon had hoped would be decisive. Napoleon's own account says, quote, "The most terrible of all my battles was the one before Moscow. The French showed themselves to be worthy of victory, but the Russians showed themselves worthy of being invincible." End quote. Napoleon retreats with most of the Grande Armée intact. On the long march home, typhus wipes out most of his men. 1812 to 1814. Rothschild's army versus Napoleon's armée. From his base in London's financial district known as the City, Nathan Rothschild single-handedly continues to finance Britain's war to defeat Napoleon. Shipments of gold to the European continents fund the Duke of Wellington's army and also those of Britain's allies, Prussia and Austria. The Rothschild brothers coordinate their activities across the continent and develop a network of agents, shippers, and couriers to transport gold across war-torn Europe. Were it not for Rothschild's limitless fortune, the Allies would surely have had to make peace with Napoleon by now. (1813). Napoleon scores more victories, but his forces are being depleted. There is a lull in fighting over the winter of 1812-13, as both the Russians and the French rebuild their forces. Napoleon is then able to field 350,000 troops. Emboldened by France's failure in Russia, Prussia joins with Austria, Sweden, Russia, Great Britain, Spain, and Portugal in yet another coalition. Napoleon assumes command in Germany and inflicts a series of defeats on the coalition, culminating in the Battle of Dresden in August of 1813. Despite these stunning successes against multiple armies, the losses continue to mount against Napoleon. The French army is eventually pinned down by a force twice its size at the Battle of Leipzig. This is by far the largest battle of the Napoleonic Wars and cost more than 90,000 casualties in total. Spring 1814. Paris is captured. Napoleon forced to abdicate. Napoleon withdraws back to France, his army having been reduced to 70,000 soldiers and 40,000 stragglers against more than 3 times as many Allied troops. The French are surrounded as British forces press from the south and other coalition forces positioned to attack from the German states. Paris is captured by the coalition in March of 1814. On April 2, 1814, the French Senate declares Napoleon deposed. When Napoleon learns that Paris has surrendered, he proposes that the army march on the capital. His marshals then mutiny. They confront Napoleon and force him to announce his unconditional abdication only 2 days later. April 1814. Napoleon is exiled to the island of Elba. The combination of Rothschild's endless money, cunning British intrigue, limitless Allied manpower, the Spanish ulcer, and the disastrous typhus-infected retreat from Russia were all just too much for the French to overcome. After Napoleon's abdication, King Louis XVIII is installed as ruler of France. Napoleon is exiled to the island of Elba off the Italian coast, where he is given authority over the island's 12,000 inhabitants. August 1814. The British burn the White House. British forces occupy Washington, D.C. They set fire to the White House and other important buildings including the Treasury, the Capitol, and the Library of Congress. Less than 2 days after sacking Washington, the British are forced to leave when a violent hurricane tears through D.C. The freak storm extinguishes fires, kills British troops, and damages many of their ships. President Madison and the rest of the government then quickly return to the capital city. Legend has it that a storm sent by divine providence drove the British away. Later that same year, Britain and the United States will make peace. February 1815. The legend continues. Napoleon escapes from exile. Separated from his wife and sons, and aware of rumors that he might be shipped to a remote island in the middle of the Atlantic, Napoleon stuns Europe by escaping from Elba with a handful of supporters and soldiers in February of 1815. Soon after landing in the French mainland, a regiment of French soldiers, under orders to arrest him, confronts their former emperor. Napoleon approaches the regiment alone, dismounts his horse, and shouts, "Here I am! Kill your emperor if you wish." The soldiers respond with, "Long live the emperor," and march with Napoleon to Paris. King Louis XVIII flees. Napoleon quickly raises another army. He will once again confront the Rothschild-funded British and Prussians at the decisive Battle of Waterloo in Belgium. June 1815, the Battle of Waterloo. Again financed by the House of Rothschild, the Prussians, led by Gebhard von Blücher, and the British, led by the Duke of Wellington, amass their armies near the northeastern border of France. Napoleon is forced to preemptively attack France's enemies before they can unleash a massive coordinated invasion of France, along with other members of this latest Allied coalition. The Battle of Waterloo is fought on Sunday, June 18th of 1815, near Waterloo in present-day Belgium. Miraculously, the French army nearly wins the great battle. It is only the late arrival of Prussian reinforcements that suddenly tilts the battle against the French. The defeat at Waterloo marks the end of Napoleon's 100 days' return from exile and ends his rule as emperor once and for all. The very word Waterloo has since been synonymous with one's final defeat. June 1815. Nathan Rothschild capitalizes upon the Battle of Waterloo.
This is how it really happened. Selling bonds to the public had raised plenty of cash for the British government, but neither bonds nor banknotes were any use to Wellington. To provision his troops and pay Britain's allies against France, he needed a currency that was universally acceptable. Nathan Rothschild was given the job of taking the money raised in the bond market and delivering it to Wellington as gold. The success of this operation would determine the fate of the warring empires and of all Europe.
This letter marks a turning point in the history of both the Rothschild family and the British government. It's dated the 11th of January 1814, and it's an order from the Chancellor of the Exchequer to the Commissary-in-Chief, telling him to appoint Nathan Rothschild, Mr. Rothschild, as a British government agent. Nathan's job was to gather together as much gold and silver as he could find on the European continent and make sure that it got to the Duke of Wellington and his army, who had just fought their way out of Spain into the south of France. It was an operation that relied heavily on the Rothschilds' unique pan-European credit network, and also on Nathan's ability to mobilize gold the way Wellington could mobilize troops.
Shifting such vast amounts of gold in the middle of a war was hugely risky, of course. Yet from the Rothschilds' point of view, the hefty commissions they were able to charge more than justified the risks. The Rothschilds soon became indispensable to the British war effort. In the words of the British Commissary-in-Chief, Rothschild of this place has executed the various services entrusted to him in this line admirably well, and though a Jew, we place a good deal of confidence in him. The Rothschilds were so effective as war financiers because they had a ready-made banking network within the family. Nathan in London, Amschel in Frankfurt, James in Paris, Karl in Amsterdam, and Salomon roving wherever Nathan saw fit. If the price of gold was higher in, say, Paris than in London, James in Paris would sell, and Nathan in London would buy.
I think the edge over families like the Barings with whom they were competing was that they had their brothers in very important financial centres and countries. Now, whether that was premeditated, whether they thought that through as they got out of the ghetto, it's hard to believe that they went as far as that. But that's what happened, and once they saw that it was an advantage, I think they worked on that advantage.
In March 1815, Napoleon returned to Paris from exile in Elba, determined to revive his imperial ambitions. The Rothschilds immediately ramped up their gold operation, buying up all the bullion and coins they could lay their hands on. Nathan's reason for buying this huge stock of gold was simple. He assumed that, as with all Napoleon's wars, this would be a long one. His gold would be more and more sought after, and it would rise in value. It proved to be a near fatal miscalculation. Wellington famously called the Battle of Waterloo the nearest run thing you ever saw in your life. After a day of brutal charges, counter-charges and heroic defence, the late arrival of the Prussian army finally proved decisive. For Wellington, it was a glorious victory. But not for the Rothschilds.
No doubt it was gratifying to Nathan Rothschild to be the first to hear the news of Napoleon's defeat. Thanks to the swiftness of the Rothschild couriers, he heard it fully 48 hours before Major Henry Percy delivered Wellington's official dispatch to the British cabinet. The Battle of Waterloo was the culmination of more than 2 decades of intermittent conflict between Britain and France. But it was more than just a battle between two armies. It was also a contest between rival financial systems. One, the French, based on plunder. The other, the British, based on debt. To pay for the war, the British government had sold an unprecedented amount of bonds. According to a long-standing legend, the Rothschild family made their first millions by speculating on how the outcome of the Battle of Waterloo would affect the price of these bonds. It was this legend of Jewish profiteering that a century later the Nazis did their best to embroider. In 1940, Joseph Goebbels approved the release of this film, Die Rothschilds.
Ich gebe es zu. Zum Nutzen Frankreichs, zum Schaden.
Nathan is seen bribing a French general to ensure the Duke of Wellington's victory, and then deliberately misreporting the outcome of the battle in London. This triggers panic selling of British bonds, which Nathan then snaps up at bargain basement prices.
1815. Napoleon is again exiled and probably murdered. Napoleon surrendered willingly, expecting the British to keep and honor their promises. However, once boarding the Bellerophon, Napoleon writes the following protest letter on the 4th of August 1815, quote, I hereby solemnly protest before God and man against the injustice offered me and the violation of my most sacred rights, in forcibly disposing of my person and my liberty. I came freely on board of the Bellerophon. I am not a prisoner. I am a guest of England. I was, indeed, instigated to come on board by the captain, who told me that he had been directed by his government to receive me and my suite, and conduct me to England, if agreeable to my wishes. I presented myself in good faith, with the view of claiming the protection of the English laws. As soon as I had reached the deck of the Bellerophon, I considered myself in the home and on the hearth of the British people. If it was the intention of government, in giving orders to the captain of the Bellerophon to receive me and my suite, merely to entrap me, it has forfeited its honor and sullied its flag. If this act be consummated, it will be useless for the English to talk to Europe of their integrity, their laws, and their liberty. British good faith will have been lost in the hospitality of the Bellerophon. I appeal to history. It will say that an enemy who made war for 20 years upon the English people came voluntarily, in his misfortunes, to seek an asylum under their laws. What more striking proof could he give of his esteem and his confidence? But what return did England make for so magnanimous an act? They pretended to hold out a friendly hand to this enemy, and when he delivered himself up in good faith, they sacrificed him. End quote. After the final defeat at Waterloo, Napoleon is exiled to the island of St. Helena, 1,000 miles off the coast of West Africa. King Louis XVIII is installed yet again on the throne, and predictably allows Napoleon's infamous decree against usury to expire in 1818. The Rothschilds are back in control. Rumors of Napoleon's return will continue to occasionally circulate throughout Europe. Napoleon is neglected by his British captors and will finally die in 1821 at the age of 51 from what appears to be arsenic poisoning. 1814 to 1815. Balance of power politics. The Congress of Vienna reshapes Europe. After Napoleon's defeat, the European powers hold a series of meetings in Vienna, Austria. Political boundaries are redrawn. Old disputes are settled. These conferences are known as Vienna, though many nations participate. The Congress is run by the Big Four: Britain, Prussia, Russia, and Austria. The most notable decision reached at Vienna is the consolidation of 360 small German states into a German confederation of 38 states. Arrangements made by the four great powers ensure that future disputes will be settled in a manner that will avoid the wars of the previous 20 years. Although the Congress of Vienna preserves the balance of power in Europe, it does not check the spread of red revolutionary movements that are being born and will spread across Europe some 30 years later. Balance of power politics serves in the interests of the globalist planners in that it allows for a disobedient nation or nations to be checked, challenged, and controlled by a group of other nations of equal power. The Rothschilds and their agents will soon wield enormous financial influence in 3 of the Big Four nations. Only Russia will remain free of Rothschild's reach. And this, of course, will culminate as World War I and the Bolshevik Revolution.
Meyer Amschel Rothschild had repeatedly admonished his 5 sons, if you can't make yourself loved, make yourself feared. As they bestrode the mid-19th century financial world as masters of the bond market, the Rothschilds were already more feared than loved. But now, they had become hated too. The fact that the Rothschilds were Jewish gave a new impetus to deep-rooted anti-Semitic prejudice.
Just a few months ago, a colleague of mine in my office, who collects posters, found these, this particular rather extraordinary example of anti-Semitism in a stark form about the Rothschilds, who were sort of epitomized to them and others at times the most extreme forms of undesirable capitalism as practiced by Jews.
It was above all the Rothschilds' seeming ability to permit or prohibit wars that aroused the most indignation. The Rothschilds had helped decide the outcome of the Napoleonic Wars by putting their financial weight behind Britain.
La victoire en chantant nous ouvre la barrière, la liberté guide nos pas, et du nord au midi, la trompette guerrière a sonné l'heure des combats. Trembler les ennemis de la France, roi ivre de sang et d'orgueil, le peuple souverain s'avance, tyran descendez au cercueil. La République nous appelle, sachons vaincre ou sachons périr. Un Français doit vivre pour elle, un Français doit mourir. Un Français doit vivre pour elle, un Français doit mourir. De nos yeux maternels, ne craignez pas les larmes, loin de nous les lâches douleurs. Nous devons triompher. Quand vous prenez les armes, c'est au roi pleure. Nous vous avons donné la vie, guerriers, elle n'est plus à vous. Tous vos jours sont à la patrie, elle est votre mère avant nous. La République vous appelle, sachez vaincre ou sachez périr. Un Français doit vivre pour elle, un Français doit mourir. Un Français doit vivre pour elle, un Français doit mourir. Sur ce fait, devant Dieu, nous jurons à nos pères, à nos épouses et à nos sœurs. Nous jurons à nos fils, nous jurons à nos mères d'anéantir nos oppresseurs. En tout lieu dans la nuit profonde, plongeant l'infâme royauté, les Français donneront au monde et la paix et la liberté.